please.
Perfect. I see that. So thank you. I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is the Monday, July 18th subcommittee meeting of the Finance Committee. All committee members are present. I see Deputy Mayor Davis has joined us, so all committee members are present. We have no old business for this evening, and so we'll jump right in to new business. And the first item on the agenda is the presentation and discussion for possible funding solution for the library building project, additional square footage at Prasa Library. Before we get started, and I turn it over to either Carrie or Stanley, I just wanted to give a brief statement relative to this item. This item was put on the agenda after last Monday's council meeting, when the full council voted to direct the library building committee to move forward for the additional square footage of a little over 2,000 square feet. The council was well aware that the additional 2,000 square feet was going to cost about $1.5 million. Between last Monday and this Monday, we have some new revelations relative to the usage of the state library funds. The town manager and finance director has sought to look for additional revenue. And so they will be making their presentation as to the different revenue options. I would like to ask this committee to keep an open mind. I do understand that this is a very touchy topic, and some of the items that may be presented today may be touchy, but we do have to understand that we have an obligation as a town council and as finance committee to make sure that we're not providing other committees with unfunded mandates, and that we find solutions to fund the additional square footage. And so I want to first start out by thanking Carrie and her team and the town manager for all of the phone calls, the thoughtfulness around figuring out how do we get to the $1.5 million solution. And so with that, I'll turn it either over to Stanley and Carrie to either introduce the building committee members. I see the chair on, I see the vice chair on, and then I see the library director. So I'll turn it over to either Stanley or Carrie to provide any additional updates.
Here, McClary, I'll quickly turn it over to our finance director. I do want to echo sentiments that you have expressed, probably in a little bit different way. This is a very important meeting of the finance subcommittee meeting. All of the items in some ways are related to each other. Most of the council at this point, including those in the subcommittee, may not be aware that we will require a special meeting of the town council, given some of the outstanding issues that will be addressed this evening, and in relation to the Community Investment Fund application for the library. There could be more than one issue that's taken up at that special meeting. We haven't said it yet because it depends on the discussion and deliberations and hopefully actions that the finance subcommittee may be making to the town council. And one or more of those issues that will make more apparent to you as the discussion goes along. But with that, I'll introduce our finance director.
Good evening, everybody. So I think to first start, it was requested that our financial advisor, Barry Bernabe, kind of present what some scenarios on bonding if the memo on the table for additional funding doesn't gain enough traction tonight. We'll have to look at additional avenues to fund the request for the additional square footage. So I'm going to, Nancy, if I could share my screen, we'll just quickly go over kind of what it would look like if we had to go back out to referendum and bond the additional funding that's being requested. So
I think you have screen sharing ability, Carrie.
Right.
Should be able to. Yes.
Okay. Barry, did you want to just briefly discuss the first few slides?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Carrie. So good evening, everyone. Barry Bernabe. I work closely with Carrie on this analysis about proposed new debt service coming onto the town's budget. So before we get into the nitty gritty, just three main topics I wanted to cover. There's three main factors that will impact the town's budget whenever they issue new bonds for new capital projects. The first one is the overall level of interest rates. Now, what this chart that's up there now is attempting to illustrate is the benchmark for all long-term borrowing costs. It's the yield on the 10-year U.S. Treasury bond. It actually goes back 53 years. And you can see up on that green circle kind of towards the upper part of the graph is back in 1981 when long-term rates peaked at 16%. Since then, they've been coming down, and on the far right-hand side, you see a green arrow, and they hit an all-time low in March of 2020. However, since then, rates have come up quite a bit. Now from a 50-year perspective, it doesn't look that bad. But for a 2 or 3 year perspective, rates have come up quite a bit. So the overall level of rates have come up a little bit from where they were. That's the first topic. If we go on to the next chart, we'll see the other main factor besides the overall level of interest rates is the town's bond rating. So just like any one of us with our credit score determines our what we could borrow for a mortgage or a car loan. Well, a municipality has a bond rating. And the good news with Bloomfield is there on the left-hand side, you see the Standard & Poor's rating scale. The highest is a AAA. Bloomfield is rated AA+. So Bloomfield's rated one notch lower than West Hartford, than Greenwich, than Avon, than Wilton. So it's a very, very strong bond rating. A lot of it has to do with the town's management team, financial practices, and strong fund balance position. So what other factors go into that bond rating? If we go on to the next page, there's really 5 factors that determine that. They look at your management practices. They look at your economy and your demographics, your financial performance or your fund balance. And Bloomfield has one of the strongest fund balance positions in the state of Connecticut. And number 4 there is debt management. So even though debt is an important part of the bond rating, it really is only 10% of the overall score. And the last one here is long-term liabilities. They look at how many liabilities municipalities have for long-term pension costs or retiree healthcare costs. Bloomfield is very strong on all of these metrics. So we've talked about the overall level of interest rates, we've talked about the bond rating. And the third component that I think is important is the foundation of any debt planning, and that's your existing debt requirements. And that's what this graph attempts to illustrate. Those blue bars are what bonds that the town has already issued. And the good news is you can see that those bars go down. So any new debt that comes on that gets lopped on top of that will be mitigated by the aggressive amortization of that existing debt. So those are the 3 main factors: the overall level of interest rates, your bond rating, and the town's existing debt profile. So now if we go on to the next chart, we can see what Carrie and I attempted to illustrate various different bonding scenarios. So maybe I can have Carrie kind of give you an overview of what we're looking at here.
Sure. So we, the first scenario we're going to look at is kind of status quo. It's the 29.255 million for the library, the 2 million for Philly Park. So a total bonding of 31,255,000. Then I asked Barry to kind of do 4 scenarios for us. The first scenario is going to be the 29.255 million less the grant of $1 million, but to include the $2.526 million, which would give us the additional square footage. It takes into account escalation costs because we would unfortunately not be able to move forward with the project as the schedule stands now. The second scenario is what I just discussed with the library plus $476,000 additionally for Philly Park. The $476,000 is what Jonathan is submitting to the CIF funds in hopes that we get that approved. The third scenario is the $29.255 million less the $1 million grant for the library, but it also includes $6.552 million, which would put all the value engineering back and the additional square footage. Scenario 4 is what I just said for the library, plus the $476,000 for the Philly Park that they're seeking through CIF. So the original slide just kind of gives us what our debt service would look like. So in 2025, in 2026, and 2027, we're going to have tough years. We are looking at an increase in our debt service of $683,000, and then $472,000. Luckily, in 2028, we see a drop off, which is something good that we can look forward to. So the first scenario is taking a 20-year bond, and we are looking at, so instead of in 2024, our debt service being reduced $19,050, it's going to increase $18,600. So the net impact for scenario 1, which just adds the $2.526 million for the additional square footage, it increases our debt service $37,650 in 2025, $43,000, 2026, $41,000, and just a minimal increase of a couple $1,000s in 2027. If we look to have a 25-year payback schedule, in scenario 1B, I'll call it, we still are seeing an increase in debt service in 2024 of $37,650 when compared to the original requested amount of the $31 million. In 2025, you'll notice that it goes down $53,000. In 2026, $48,000. In 2027, it's $83,000. So not that our debt service overall goes down, but when comparing the $31 million 20-year bond to the 25-year $32,781,000, we'll see a little bit of savings just because it's a longer term. So our debt is spread out essentially over 5 more years. All right. In scenario 2, it's the library plus the additional funding for Philly Park over a 20-year term. We'll see in 2024, when compared to the 31 million, our debt service is going up 37,000. In 2025, it's 53,000. In 2026, it's 56,000. And in 2027, it's 18,000. In scenario 2B, we'll say if we're going to spread that 33,257,000 over 25 years, we will see that it's still in 2024 goes up 37,000, but in 2025 it's down 39,000. In 2026 it's down 37,000. In 2027 it's down 73,000, and that's again just because it's a longer payback schedule than the 20-year $31 million. So scenario 3, which takes in all the value engineering plus the additional square footage. So we're looking at $6.552 million for the library project. We, in 2024, still the same 37,000 increase. 2025, it's $159,000 increase. 2026, it's 155. And 2027, we're going up 114,000. The last scenario is looking at, this is scenario 3B. So this is over a 25-year period. We're going up in 2025, 53,000, same with 2026. And then in 2027, it's going to be $16,000. All right, now our last scenario, this is everything. So this is the $6.552 million for the library and the additional $476,000 for Philly Park. You'll see that in 2025, we're up 174,000. 2026, we're up 170. In 2027, we are up 129,000. If we spread that out over 25 years, we are going to be up 63,000 in both 25 and 26. And in 2027, we are going to be up 19,000. That's just a real quick overview of what our debt's going to look like, depending on what avenue that we take. We know that we are applying for the community investment funds for both the library and Philly Park, but we might not get word that we receive the funding for that in December. So if we can't find additional funding tonight, which would keep the square footage at $1.5 million, and we need to look for other ways to fund that. I would hope that the Finance Committee would think about, taking the steps to go to referendum to secure the additional appropriation and the possibility of bonding, so that we will hit no more time restraints. We will know in November if we can proceed forward, and hopefully we won't have to bond, or if we do, it'll be a small amount, but we know that we can move forward on the project because we'll have funding either as bonding and long-term debt or with the community investment funds. So that is kind of the debt overview of a possibility for the additional funding that we need for the library in Philly Park. We'll open the floor up to questions for this small segment of the discussion.
Is there any questions from members of the committee and or guests of the committee?
Yes, I have one.
Councilman Merritt, you're recognized.
Okay, thank you. I have one question. My understanding was we found some way that we didn't have to subtract the $1 million from the state from our bonding. Does not apply here? Because I see you are subtracting it. Where I think in the memo we got it, you had found a way that we could use that $1 million in addition to the bonding. That's one question. The other is, what is the cost of bonding? We've always felt that really wasn't worth bonding unless you put together a pretty good sized package. We get charges up to $30, $40, $50, $60, $100,000 doing bonding. So is that true, or what is the basic, what does bonding cost us?
Barry, can you speak better to the, I can take the first question, but if you want to tackle the second one first.
Yeah, the bonding costs, Carrie?
Yes.
Yeah, so yes, there are bonding costs. There is legal counsel, or we call bond counsel. There's a municipal advisor. There's the rating agencies. There's preparation of an official statement. There's paying agent. So on average, it does cost between $50,000 to $65,000 for each bond issue. Absolutely.
And
so,
Joe,
these scenarios that, I'm sorry, Carrie, I was going to say, these scenarios that Carrie just presented, we assumed there would be 3 different bond issues. And that's why in these analysis, Carrie illustrated, there's basically 3 years of impact on the town's budget. Now, there are countless other options. The town could do one large bond issue to mitigate your issuance costs. However, instead of having that debt breakout over 3 years, it would all hit in 1 year. So it would be close to $2 million impact in any 1 year. That's why we showed 3 bond issues.
Thank you.
And Joe, to speak to your first question, I took out the $1 million grant in the scenario situations, because if we are going out for the full ask, I wouldn't see why we wouldn't subtract out the $1 million library grant. If the benefit of having it as an additional appropriation would be, if we made a decision tonight, that would keep the additional square footage cost to $1.5 million. But I don't think that would be necessary if we ended up going out to bond for the additional amount.
Okay. But by law, are we required to subtract the $1 million, or is that?
Nope. So we do have to take another step if we decide to go that route, which would be to have an additional, basically a resolution that says we are appropriating an additional amount for cost of inflation, but we haven't done that yet. So
okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Is there any more questions from the members of this committee or guests that are attending representing the Library Building Committee? I see Councilor Politis. You have the floor.
Thank you. Just a quick question. How many municipalities are going from a 20-year to a 25-year bonding term?
We have seen some municipalities extend the term for that. Historically in Connecticut, you've only been able to go out for 20 years for what we call general purposes. For schools, you could always go out 30 years. For sewers, you could go out 30 years. For everything else, municipal buildings, town halls, libraries, you're only allowed to go out 20 years, but they recently changed the law to allow up to 30 years for any project. So I think as Carrie touched on, there are pros and cons to that. The pro is that you could mitigate your debt impact in any 1 year by stretching the term out longer. The downside is that you obviously pay more interest over 25 years or 30 years than you would over 20 years. And just one last comment on that is typically we would not recommend, say, going out too long if the average life of the project would not go out that long. Typically for a library or for a school project, an argument could be made to go out longer than 20 years because that building should last longer than 20 years.
I have another question if I can ask.
Councilor Merritt, you now have the floor.
Thank you. One of the reasons I normally wouldn't like the idea of going out longer if we do choose to bond. But in this case, even with the bond we are planning already, it might be a good idea because we have no other big buildings that have to be financed for next. We've really done our job, so that because we don't face anything short term, it would make sense to spread this burden out instead of having the same peak we are facing. And that would be at least an argument for going with a 25, because we don't have another school to do or anything else in the short term. I just want to make that point. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Merritt. Is there any other comments related to this presentation and this option of finding funding for the additional square footage for the library? If not, then I will turn it back to Carrie for option number 2.
Barry, thank you so much for attending, and we'll be in contact soon.
Okay, Carrie, thank you. Have a good night.
Okay, so you know, if we're able to secure funding by the end of July, instead of the $2.5 million it's going to cost for the additional square footage, it's going to cost the town $1.5 million because we can stay on track, on schedule, and move forward as planned. So after much communication with bond counsel, he agreed with me and the town manager that we can do a additional appropriation for the $1 million grant that we already have received. So the grant is in hand. We've got a signed grant agreement for the $1 million. So we are able to, instead of having to reduce our original appropriation, we are able to do an additional appropriation, which would allow us to put that $1 million towards the $1.5 million shortage that we are looking to fund for the additional 2,805 square feet. In my memo and my recommendation, it includes the $1 million grant, $200,000 from a capital improvement project for the upstairs chiller replacement. That project is nearing completion, and those funds will be additional and something that we can transfer to the library building project, and then the $300,000 from the American Rescue Plan Act funds. Like I said, it's going to save the town $1 million if we can come to a recommendation that the Finance Committee is willing to put forward to the council, and we can move forward by the end of July. I will now open it up for discussion.
Yes, thanks, Carrie. Before I open it to the committee members, I know you and I discussed after sharing after canvassing some of the council members related to the additional $300,000 for the American Rescue Act plan. We have gone through some of the other projects in the capital improvement project from this year. Because I don't think there is from some council members, an appetite to use the 300,000 from the American Rescue. And so some other alternatives will be to look, as I recommended to you, look at some other projects like, or other programs such as the diversity study, and looking at any of the capital improvement projects that have completed, and seeing if we can find any savings. From your canvas of those projects, were you able to find additional funding to close the gap of the $300,000?
So if the recommendation as it stands before you is one that is not approved, I was able to, with the help of Nancy, kind of canvass the current capital improvement projects, and with the help of, it should have been a disparity study, not the diversity study.
Yes, sorry.
With the help of taking the funds of that, and $18,652.28 from the 2023 town council contingency, we are able to come up with $300,000. So the yellow projects before you are ones that have finished with residual balances that we can transfer. The ones in blue are ones with balances that Nancy and myself both feel comfortable that we can take a little bit of those balances and apply to the $300,000 that's needed to complete the $1.5 million request.
So thank you for that, Carrie. And I thank you and Nancy for your hard work. I know it was quite a lift to go through on these projects to identify some savings, but I think you identifying these savings and this $300,000, I think we can achieve the goal of making sure that we find the $1.5 million while not touching the American Rescue Act, and allowing the American Rescue Act dollars to stay in place so that the community could have a say so. I know that is further down on our presentation, but I think it connects to this topic. And I know I've asked the mayor, and she agreed to appoint a community group for American Rescue, so that we can begin to escalate that. And so I think this is feasible, and I appreciate your work on finding this $300,000. I see some hands. I saw Councilor DeBeetham Brown here first, and then I'll go to Councilor Merritt. Councilor DeBeetham Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too have had conversations with Carrie, so I'm very glad that we were able to find funds someplace else. I know that there might be some who question the council's commitment to the library building project, question our commitment individually. And I do hope that they now see that we are very committed to this project. It's very hard when you're trying to make decisions that's going to benefit the entire town. And I had all confidence, and I said that to Carrie, that they would be able to find money from someplace else without us touching the American Rescue Plan Act money. So I am once again 150% in for the library, and wherever they have to take this money from, I'm 100% on that. So thank you so very much, Carrie and Nancy, for all the due diligence that you have done. I was at the point, if we needed to roll back some of those positions that we had agreed upon during the budget season, I was ready to roll back on those if we had to. That's how committed I believe that we as a council are in making sure that we get the libraries that we do need. So I'm very glad about this for the library. Just one question that I do have, and it's probably going to be it's probably answered already in my head, that for Philly Park, we would still go ahead and put the money in for the CIF for the balance of the money that Philly Park needs?
Yeah, this alternative is only addressing the additional square footage. It's not addressing the value engineering that the library is looking to, the library building committee is looking to get back, or the additional that Philly Park is looking for. So this is 1.5.
Right, so this would take care of, Mr. Chair, if I'm correct, this would take care of the directives from the council in our last meeting. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, this will take care of the additional 2,000 plus square feet that the library building committee asked, that the council directed the library building committee to move forward with. The 30,000, I think 100 or something like that. I don't know the actual number, so please don't quote me, that we voted on that needed the 1.5 million. And so this was, as Carrie mentioned, the 1 million from the state grant, the additional $200,000 savings from the third floor chiller project. And then instead of doing the $300,000 from the American Rescue Act, we talked about looking at other projects, and she's identified $300,000 for that. I believe that Carrie and her team has turned over every stone to try to find money. And so if we have escalation in costs for the library square footage or any other thing, if we don't get the 5 million from the state or any monies from the state, we find ourselves in some problems. And so that's why option one was to also start moving forward with the bond referendum. So we can have the option, and there are some deadlines that we have to meet as a subcommittee and as a council in order to get the question on November ballot, just in case we don't get the additional money for value engineering from the community investment fund. And so I think Carrie and her team has done due diligence relative to this, and I think it's now in the finance subcommittee's hand and the council's hand to determine how we want to move forward. But I see two hands for up. One is from Councilor Merritt and then the Deputy Mayor. Councilor Merritt, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I like these alternatives. I wasn't so upset about taking 300,000 of the 1.5 million of the ARI money, but it would be better not to take any of it. But I wonder what our town council contingency, I hate to see this early in the year us blow that. We may need that for some other emergency later on. How much is our total contingency?
So it's $125,000 for the fiscal year 2023.
Okay, I don't feel too bad then. Okay. Yeah, I would move this with those using the diversity study and town council contingency money.
Along with the other projects, Councilor Merritt, the basketball court lights, the $5,000, the IT improvement, the $60,000.
I'm just talking about coming up with 1.5 million.
Yep. Okay, perfect. Deputy Mayor Davis, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to start by thanking Carrie and team for being creative and coming up with some alternatives to help us get to the 1.5. I did have one question. It's not on here, but I know in our budget, we approved 8 new positions. And it's my understanding that not all of those positions have been filled. And I have seen other instances where there's sort of a cost avoidance for like keeping those 3 or 4, I don't know how many positions are vacant at the moment, but not hiring for a couple of months, so we get some savings from not bringing on those new folks. And I wondered if we probably don't need it now, but if we were concerned about using it in the council contingency this early, that may be a way of avoiding some costs and adding something back into the mix if there are positions that are unfilled, holding off on those for 2 or 3 months and looking to see how much that would cost. So, Carrie, I don't know, Carrie, do you know how many vacant positions we have from those that were allocated in the budget for new positions?
I think there might be 3 that we're currently looking to fill. But but there's benefits to leaving that money in there, in case we get into a tight spot, in the fiscal year 2023 budget. I'll have more flexibility with that savings there than I will with the town council contingency.
Okay.
And it would be hard for me because I can't do fourth quarter, I can't do department to department transfers until the fourth quarter. It would be very hard for me to figure out a way to get departmental money out of the department and into a different department, just by going with our charter.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Then I'm good, Mr. Chair, with the recommendations by staff.
Perfect. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councilor Politis, and then I'll call for the motion to move this forward.
Yeah, I'm going to apologize a little bit for my ignorance up front on this question, but this is a project that's going to get bonded over the next 3 or 4 years, I guess, is based on what we're looking at. What is the urgency to find $1.5 million right now when, in my opinion, this library might actually come in on budget, because over the next 3 or 4 years, as supply chain woes get solved and stuff like that, the actual pricing of this overage that we're expecting right now may not actually come to fruition.
Yeah, I mean, Fran, I think that's a great question. And what we can say for certain, well, not for certain, but a good estimate is that if we move forward now, versus waiting until November or December to move forward, it's a small enough amount of time where you're not going to see the market flux that greatly, where we'll experience drastic savings in supplies and materials. But what we do know is that we're probably going to be looking at about $1 million increase in the timing delay. So, while we can't really predict the market, what it's going to be in a year or two, this could potentially save the town $1 million plus the interest of bonding the additional amount. So there's pros and cons for sure. I get where you're coming from, but for what we can speak to and what we do know, and that's $1 million savings. That's why we're trying so hard to find the $1.5 million for this project.
Carrie, the other point, Carrie, is that the project gets bid out in January or February. So it doesn't get bid out each time we borrow the funds. So that's why the money would be needed up front, because you can't award the contracts unless you have the money in place. And if you have any other questions about how that works, Counselor, I think the construction manager is here to answer any of those questions if we didn't answer them.
No, that actually, Nancy, is what makes sense to me. If you have to have but is that now by town chart? I mean, I guess the question is, you have to have appropriations for all of the money up front, or at least approval of all of the money up front when you're doing this contract before you can go out for bid.
Right.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. Thank you.
So I have a question that is important. So we find the $1.3 million for $5 million for this. And so my question is, I know I asked at the last council meeting the usage of the square footage, and I see the building committee chair and the construction manager on there. Do you have a diagram or a picture or anything of the use of the 28,000 square feet versus the 30,000? So what is being used for the additional 2,000 square feet, if that's appropriate to ask?
Sure, Mr. Chair. No, I actually didn't come prepared with diagrams this evening. I would also defer to our library director, Elizabeth Lane, to add to what I'm going to say here. Generally, the additional square footage is spread out throughout the building. It's not a specific space or two or three. It really is across the board on all the spaces of the building. So it did affect many areas of the building overall. So you can't say there's a program added or deleted in any of the scenarios. They all just get a little bit more space.
Great, thank you. I see Councilor Harrington, and then we'll go to the deputy mayor, and then if there's a question to be called to move this forward would be great. Councilor Harrington, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Am I on?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. I just want to say, in coming to this meeting, my thought was that we were going to have to concern ourselves with moving into ARPA funding to make the 1.5 million. After reviewing what has been presented by our finance director and Nancy, that I find it to be an exceptional move. I mean, it's obviously a concern when you have to pull money from other places, and some of which we had definitely planned to use. But I don't think our pursuit for funding will stop at this point, because we have now recognized that, you know, there's a change in the playing field, and it could, you know, require additional funding. And so if we have access to obtaining more from other funding sources than, you know, outside of our town budget, I think we should, you know, pursue them. One that was brought the other day, and I don't know if anyone moved forward with it, is Hartford Foundation for Public Giving. Certainly asking for less than 1.5 million would seemingly be more attractive than you know, asking for that full amount. So there still may be avenues for us to pursue additional funding. We don't know if the CIF funds will be approved for us. So I just think it was important for us to try to maintain those 2,000 plus square foot, you know, usage space for the library, and without the use of our ARPA funds, because we certainly have a great need within the community to utilize those funds for our residents. So thank you very much for the presentation, and let's move forward. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Davis, and then I have a question for Carrie, Nancy, or the town manager.
Yeah,
So
thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to call the question because the council has already voted and agreed that we were going to direct the library to come up to the additional square footage. And I think we've gotten all the information we need, and I'm prepared. I'd like to move the question and vote on the recommendation by staff.
perfect. So before we do that, Deputy Mayor Davis, I just have one question for Carrie and the town manager or Nancy. Do we still not want to move forward with the referendum question, just in case that the $5 million or the number from the Community Investment Act doesn't go forward for value engineering? It does not tie our hands not to have that question on the ballot in November, so that we can not tie or box the library in just in case they don't get that additional money requested from the community investment. So should we still move forward with the referendum question for November, just in case we don't get notified that we got the money from the community investment? Because there's still $5 million out there in value engineering. So I just want to make sure that we are.
That's our decision.
None of those changes would delay the project timeline though, right? The value engineering wouldn't affect the timeline. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So I would.
Chair McCrary, that isn't the administration's recommendation at this point. That certainly is an issue that the town council and even this finance subcommittee, if you want to go in that direction. From all that I've heard, we wanted to avoid a referendum at this stage if we could basically keep the project unscheduled. The action that you're about to take allows us to do that without an additional $1 million or necessarily adding to the timing of the schedule. So that's the administration's position. I think it would be premature, but ultimately it's the town council's determination if you want that extra insurance for what would be the value engineering cost added back in to the library. In case the community investment fund application isn't approved. I would also, caution you with this application. There's a certain level of strategy that goes into it as well. I asked the question. We had a special meeting with the director of the CIF funds, Matt Pugliese, and I asked the question if he had any idea of, given the current environment, if they expect to see these types of projects in the applications. He really didn't have any idea, but one of the things that he emphasized was one of the things that will be considered is in making applications, whether it's projects like ours with the escalating costs, but have we considered bonding, municipal bonding, which we have, of course, and has been approved, use of federal funds, other funds that may be available. So I don't know how strategic it would be at this point to put, but if we're willing to add additional tax burden when these funds that are being made by the state is intended for the state to help with projects to avoid that scenario. So I'm pretty comfortable without moving ahead with the referendum.
All right, thank you, Mr. Town Manager. Was that a motion, Mr. Davis, Deputy Mayor Davis? And was that seconded by Councilor Merritt to move the proposal?
It was a motion, yes.
I'll second it then. That's
Yep,
fine.
to move forward with the second option, subtracting the American Rescue, but using the proposed $300,000 an alternative funding solution for the library building shortfall. The motion has been properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Deputy Mayor Davis.
Yeah, just for the record, is this the second option or is this option 3? Because
This is option. It could be option 3, using the 1 million, the 200,000 from the savings from the upstairs chiller with the alternative funding solution of $300,000. It could be option 3, or it could be option 2, substituting American Rescue for this. So it's whatever you choose, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
I was seconding the 300,000 from the disparity in town council. And that's what he said.
Yep, that's
Yeah.
what I said. That's what I
Yeah.
said.
Yeah.
Plus $1 million.
My only question is, I thought when they did the presentation, they started off with option 1, then there was an option 2.
That was on the bonding.
So option 1 was back to bonding. Option 2 was the recommended memo from Carrie related to the 1 million, the
And
200,000 in savings and the opera. But we scratched the American Rescue 300,000 for the additional alternative funding for the library project.
Okay, good.
Or are
Then
you
that's
saying
the
you want to
motion.
create a whole new motion?
No, that's fine. Well, the second option minus the opera funding and the reallocated proposed 300K alternative funding solution.
Yep.
Thank you.
Any other additional questions? Seeing no hands, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, any abstention, motion carries to the council. Thank you. And again, Carrie, thank you. Mark, did you have your hand up? You're on mute.
You.
Yes, I just raised my hand. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank you very much for bringing this to the forefront immediately in this subcommittee meeting, and thank all the subcommittee members. This is so important to keep the project moving in a healthy direction. The building committee has spent a tremendous amount of time establishing these additional needs. We don't take them lightly at all. We know all the difficulties and complexities of trying to find more money. So thank you very much to our finance director and Nancy for being creative. And hopefully we are on a very good path to move forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And I'd like to thank the committee and the members of the council because I got an opportunity to speak to most of the council members this weekend. The mayor, the deputy mayor, Nancy, Carrie, the town manager. Thanks for all your work on making sure that we are able to provide the square footage needed that makes our director of libraries, Elizabeth Lane, and her staff happy so that they're able to produce and service the community the best possible way that they possibly can. So thank you to all of the council members, lots of phone calls. Thank you for that. Moving on, next we have the discussion and update related to the community outreach phase of the American Rescue Act funding of $1.6 million. Before we get started on that and hear from our consultants and Carrie and the town manager, I do again want to say that I've spoke with the mayor on a number of occasions after last week's meeting, and I've asked the mayor to appoint an ad hoc committee to work with the town manager, the finance director, and a consultant to work with the group of community members to figure out a solution on how to spend the American Rescue Act. The mayor does plan on taking names and recommendations from the public on who would like to sit on that committee. The committee will be charged with finding a solution, hearing proposals, and making final recommendations to the council. Ultimately, the council will have a decision or have the final decisions on who gets funded. And so I'm happy that the mayor has agreed to stand up a community ad hoc committee to deal with these $1.6 million, this $1.6 million. I believe that this puts the decision and the remainder of the community engagement and how dollars will be heard and developing the applications in the hands of the public and out of the hands of politicians, ultimately to the end of the process. And so I think it is a good solution. And so we will hear the update from town staff and our consultant, and then I'll take questions from members of the committee. Carrie and or Stanley.
Yeah, Chair McCleary, I'll turn it over to Carrie again for making introductions in this next part. But related to what we just finished, I want to get clarification in my mind, and therefore clarification for the subcommittee. I mentioned the need for a special meeting of the town council. The original purpose for that special meeting was after the last library building committee meeting, we recognized that the number that the council had approved in the motion or the resolution that needs to go with the library project application, that it would have been short by around $1 million, I believe, and that was because of the timetable and the inflationary cost estimates. Carrie, and maybe even Mark and Elizabeth, with what the finance subcommittee is recommending and pending the approval of the town council, ratifying what the finance subcommittee just approved with the $1.5 million, is the amount, the original amount that the town council approved in the grant. Is that number okay, or is that a number that's still subject to change and would also need to go back to the town council in this special meeting? Can someone help me with that?
Sure, Mr. Chair, may I?
Chairman
Yep, you
Clary?
have the floor. Yep, you have the floor, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. My understanding is now that this $1.5 million is secured, or will be soon, we hope, that the original amount requested will be adequate. And we asked Tom Romanoli from Downs Construction to be here tonight. He's the main source we rely on when it comes to all the funding and timing of all this. And I would ask Tom if also to confirm that, if you would, or enlighten us.
Yeah, sure, Mark. Yes, we did review the numbers, and based on the earlier agenda item, the original appropriated money of the 5 million, and was it 5,526,000? I agree with Mark that will now be appropriate to continue forward for the CIF funds and appropriation for the value engineering items.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think we will still require a special town council meeting in order to get this in place by the end of July. But it won't be for the original purpose that we were thinking, having to amend the CIF resolution. Instead, is to ask the council to ratify the actions of the finance subcommittee here this evening. So thank you, Chair McClary.
No problem. Thank you. So next, I'll turn it over to Carrie for a discussion and update on the community outreach phase of the American Rescue Act funding of $1.6 million. Carrie? And I see James on.
Yep. James, did you want me to share my screen, or did you want to share yours?
You could share yours, Carrie.
Oh.
Councilor Curtin, I noticed your hand. Could you put lower your hand until after the presentation, and I'll make sure I get to you first, Councilor. I just wanted to recognize that I did see your hand, but we're going to go into this presentation and then we'll take questions.
Great. Thank you, Carrie. So, what's on the screen here, we wanted to delve a little bit deeper into some of the written responses that came in, from the survey. In particular, one of the questions related to what could possibly make, the town better. And we wanted to try to go through and identify and make an inventory of common responses. So what you can see on the screen here is, very brief summary of the analysis of going through this. We identified about 13 different categories, which you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen. We'd gone through as each one of the responses, we'd gone through it and made a note of each time those responses were mentioned. So business was the most common response that we noticed in those written responses. And there's a few things that kind of correlate to what is business. Some of the responses discussed perhaps assistance to those businesses which were negatively impacted as a result of the pandemic. Some of the responses discussed trying to attract more restaurants and other types of businesses into the town. The second biggest response was streets and general infrastructure. There was quite a few different responses that came back indicating, disrepair of streets and roads and things of that nature. So as you can see kind of on the screen here, it's just a general synopsis. There was some language that we'd put around this, kind of identifying, projects for each one of those main categories. And then we also included some kind of, general responses in there. It's just some highlights of what folks were saying, what they were indicated. And I think the real point of this here is to make sure that we're moving through that engagement timeline and, kind of trying to dig down deeper into the information that we have, but so that we can kind of start fleshing out, a spend plan for some general categories. So this is kind of really the intention, again, is just to kind of guide the conversation. As you're aware, kind of the next step in this process is to start development of those tentative plans, but also to participate in some, perhaps town hall sessions, things of that nature, so we can get some further information. But as you can see on the screen, again, these are kind of the key areas that we've been noticing so far within, within the responses.
Does that conclude your presentation, James?
Generally, I think, we can open it up to questions. Carrie, I don't know if you have anything else that, you'd like to highlight from this portion of it.
So before we open it up, I have a question. You talked about streets and infrastructure, and then I see water and sewer infrastructure. I know we heard at the last council meeting relative doing public comments about folks' inability to use their backyards because of water in their backyard. What category would that be in? Is that in street infrastructure or water and sewer infrastructure?
No, that was combined with water and sewer infrastructure. So it's the number 7 you see on the screen there. That's combined, the drainages with that. The streets and infrastructure, it's more general infrastructure. Perhaps mentioning, some of the buildings were in disrepair. Really, a lot of it focused on specifically on the streets, but it was just general infrastructure, not water, not sewer, certainly not broadband.
No flooding of backyards and flooding of basements?
Not under that category. And now it's possible too, just to keep in mind, some of the responses that were received may have, discussed several of those categories. So it's not to say that one response might not have mentioned, streets, but also mentioned drainage and repair, but we broke those out separately. So we said, all right, if we looked at that response, we're going to inventory one for streets and infrastructure and then one for, water and sewer infrastructure. So they were separated, but they're inventoried.
And so my next question is related to defining public health infrastructure. How did you define that? What are some of the items that you included under public health?
So public health, there was discussion of, increasing testing sites within the town, perhaps providing some services to seniors, perhaps transportation to, health facilities, things of that nature. So it's kind of focused, both on COVID and then just general health overall. There was some discussion of, mental health and, the impact that the pandemic has had on certain individuals. And, so mental health would be included in that as well.
Perfect. Is there any questions from members of the committee? Do I see any hands? I know I promised Councilor Curtin that once the presentation was done, that I would recognize him. Councilor Curtin, do you have any?
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make some comments around the 1.6 million of ARPA funds, and I'm happy to hear some of the discussion in regards to the importance of many different initiatives that I believe this council has to address pertaining to the fallout of COVID. I think one of the things that I just heard, the mental health was one of the things on the top of the list. And that kind of goes with the health district. And I haven't really heard us talking about funding to make sure that our health district, our leisure service and the service they provide to our seniors and some of our youth within the town, to make sure that families know that there's an outlet within town that they can come, because it's a mental health issue is a sensitive thing. Most folks are very reluctant to come forward. So I think we need to invest funds in trying to, kind of reach people where they are, and to make sure that, folks don't feel abandoned in their homes and feel there's not a way to get help. And infrastructure is another topic, along with, I know there's other issues that ABC had come out many times and talk about. So those are within the 1.6 million. We have 3 things right there that definitely need to be addressed. And what I would like to recommend, I am not a fan of trying to form another committee. I think this council has the jurisdiction and responsibility to make sure these funds are properly allocated based on the needs before us. And what I would like to see is, and I know the town manager has talked about those meetings that he has put forward to the council to meet to talk about items like this. How can we come up and make sure that based on the needs, we allocate those funds? So I wouldn't recommend going into creating another committee to then come back to us to tell us the things that I believe we already know. I think we just need to get together, brainstorm, and figure a way out, and to kind of put these things into different categories and just deal with it. So those will be my recommendation in regards to how we move forward. in soliciting more feedback from the public. I wasn't a fan of the initial questions, and even though it may be the way we had to phrase it, it basically did not give the reader more of an insight of what we were trying to solicit from them. So I think there was some confusion there, and hence the lack of participation that we would have expected from residents. So I think we need to find a different approach in getting that message out and getting more information. But those are my comments for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Carrie, quick question. For the survey, the Finance Committee approved it, and then the survey went to the full council where all members of the council, did all members of the council have an opportunity to review and provide, I can't recall, feedback for the survey questions that were developed?
Yes, yes.
So all councilors had an
Yes,
opportunity?
the town council approved the survey and the engagement plan back in April.
Did we have any feedback as it relates to the survey and maybe changing the questions?
Well, the premise of the original survey questions was following the ARPA guidelines that we received from the Department of Treasury. I think if you look at the survey now, and given that it is a representative sample and a valid survey, and for those neighbors who participated, I think they've given us good comments. I think for the next stage, we would be looking at more specific categories, such as those that you see from the survey.
So, so when you say look at and I see Councilor Councilor Kurt, and then Councilor Politis, I'll get to you next. But when you say the next categories, are we taking the top 5, the top 10, the top 6 from this, and then going out to the public for community engagement forums or public hearings?
I would say all of the above, plus whatever other categories that the Finance Subcommittee or the council wants to see added.
Okay, and so is and then I see Councilor DeBeetham Brown. I'll go to the committee members. So are you requesting that we clarify the sections that potentially this subcommittee and then ultimately the council would like to focus on? Would you like this committee to make a recommendation tonight? Are you asking for a recommendation, or is this just for information purposes?
I think this is informational purposes, but just bearing in mind that the town council is the ultimate decision maker. You can certainly have the assistance of the Finance Subcommittee or another committee, but I think any priorities, because that's basically what the next phase called for, prioritize solutions that the town council wants to address. And if you're looking for further feedback from the public, either at large, doesn't necessarily have to be sending it out to all households again. I think that would be self-defeating in some ways, but certainly in the different workshops that we would anticipate, where we can drill down and not only broad categories, but specific types of programs that could come out of these different categories. As an example, if we took business, and one of the things that James mentioned was aid to small businesses or bringing in new businesses, we could develop, call it a pilot, or not pilot isn't a good word for it, but a proposal that would be more specific to what we have gotten from the survey, plus any specific programs that the town council or councilors, for that matter, might identify that really starts to look at what the community would be willing to embrace and support at some level.
Great. Thank you, Stanley. One last question before I get to the members of the committee. Is this, I know we've had some questions related to the survey. Is the results from the survey, does it qualify as, I can't even speak tonight, excuse me.
Statistically valid?
Valid, yes.
Yes, from my research, given that, and this is a survey sample, it's not meant to be asking the voters to vote. And typical of surveys is a 5% response. What I will tell the council, because we've kept you updated week by week, what those survey results started, even when it was much smaller than where we are now with 400 samples. There's not much that has changed. It's stayed pretty much consistent. I think if you break it down by the different demographics that the consultant has also provided on a week-to-week basis, you can always make the argument that, well, wish we had a higher number in this particular category, but is it a representative sample that is consistent with the overall survey? I believe so.
Great. I saw Councilor Politis hand up first, then we'll go to Councilor Curtin and then Councilor DeBeetham Brown in that order.
Yeah, I just got the answer to my question, but I did have a statement to follow that up. We're still talking about survey results in the number of around 400, if I'm not, from what I just heard from the town manager, and in households of around what, 20,000 in town, is that correct?
8,000 would be the number
8,000
of businesses and our families. By far that family.
Well, first of all, as a business in town, I never recall receiving a survey for my business. So all I remember is receiving one for my home. So I'm not sure that we're reaching everybody here, but it doesn't seem like 5% doesn't really seem all that statistically significant to me. So I would have to say, in my opinion, this is strictly my opinion, that this is kind of a failure to reach out to people and get positive feedback for this ARPA money. I have to agree with Councilor Curtin, and I don't think that the answer to the solution is another ad hoc committee with slowing down this process and stuff like that. I think that, we are the ones tasked with spending this money, and I think that public hearings or town hall type solution, town hall type meetings would be more advantageous with all 9 councilors present, as opposed to turning this over to an ad hoc committee. I think it's a little disappointing overall, the performance of this study to date. I think that I don't know how we, at this point, we solicit more participation from the residents of town without spending more of the ARPA money to do so. So maybe better advertising on our billboards to meetings that would be directly in front of town council might be a better use of our time and money, what's left of these ARPA funds, as opposed to continuing on with round 2 of surveys or any of that extent, because this, in my opinion, again, seems pretty unsuccessful. Thank you.
Councilor Curtin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to put a recommendation, I guess a suggestion on the table, just kind of in the same vein as Councilor Politis. What I would recommend at this point, I think that to go out again, and I just want us to be sensitive that there is a cost associated with trying to administer this by the consultant. So what I would say, just rough estimate. We have the 1.6. We've identified, just by having conversations here and in other venues, we have 3 major categories. We have some infrastructure, small business, mental health, and I think you could kind of, I think there's another one there, public health, that kind of ropes into the mental health. I would say you put it into 4 categories. You're talking $400,000 in each categories. It's not anything in stone, and you move forward from that point and engage in through a public hearing to get feedback and input into those 4 buckets. Because once again, time is money. So if we hesitate in how we move forward, I think that's going to keep reducing that 1.6. So I would suggest just right off the bat, the council has to take the initiative on this and start moving this along and trying to deal with those 4 areas that we know for a fact are important. And residents have been coming in and discussing and talking about it. So I would suggest we take that approach instead of to go through another survey. I think we missed the boat on that one. So that would be my suggestion. Thank you.
I don't know who's, thank you, Councilor Curtin. But so on one hand, we're saying that the outreach and the response of 5% is inadequate. And it doesn't maybe represent the sentiments of the community because it's 5%, and that everyone wasn't included. And then we're saying, let's use those responses that's up on the screen, and let's use public health and safety for mental health. But I see some other categories like parks and recreations, housing and redevelopment, and in the schools that come in higher than mental health. And so what criteria are we going to use to develop those 4 categories? I'll be interested to hear from the town manager and Carrie and the consultant relative to if that's the way we go, what criteria are we using, or that should we use to select what the top 4, 5, 3, 2, whatever number that we're going to select. I would really rely on the consultant to give us some feedback, because even if you put public safety and public health together, it still doesn't come up to the numbers of parks and recreation, town housing and redevelopment, and streets and infrastructure and small businesses. So I would like to hear from the consultant as to how he's helped other communities narrow the focus down, and then I'll go to Councilor DeBeetham Brown and then the Deputy Mayor.
Certainly. So, we've done in other communities, and we could certainly do here is, you create a matrix of, proposed, projects or items for spending. And then you almost set, kind of a rubric to develop, kind of a funding tier, and anything that's, above that rubric or anything that falls below it, maybe you don't look at everything above it, you look at, and maybe those are the projects that you start to kind of flesh out. What we've seen a number of jurisdictions do is, they first start looking at things in those broad categories. So I've seen, municipalities have gone and said, passed a resolution saying, all right, we're going to take X number of dollars from our, ARPA, categories, or I'm sorry, from our ARPA funds, and allocate it for, these types of projects where it's public health, whether it's public safety, whatever the case may be, and they're creating that general allocation. Now, within that allocation, at that point, perhaps they haven't really decided on specific, programs or specific projects, or just allocating those monies overall. And then what they do is, kind of things are, moving forward, they then allocate much smaller projects, and they kind of draw on those monies for those particular things. And that process is handled different. We've seen it handled in different ways. If you look at businesses, perhaps, if you allocate a certain amount of money towards small businesses, maybe there's an application process where businesses have to show that they were impacted in some way. And, we've done calculations for municipalities where, businesses may be entitled for a certain amount of funds depending on how they were impacted. So it can be kind of done in a lot of different ways, but, kind of the broader categories, and then you kind of narrow it down.
Councilor DeBeetham Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I go back to a few things that we talk about, trying to be more creative in how we hear from our residents. I want to step back 2 steps. I know that the library building project, when they were doing their survey, they had some foot traffic. They had surveys that they mailed. They had people knocking on doors, and this was by volunteers. So if we're going to do another survey, we will definitely have to think about a creative way of doing it instead of just mailing it. Now, I spoke to a few people here in the town of Bloomfield that I believe that they are pretty much plugged in and they can't remember seeing the survey, much less filling it out. Not saying it didn't go to their homes, but they can't remember seeing it and or filling it out. I do also know that the town manager is trying to have working meetings at some point in time. Maybe we take those working meetings and we invite our residents to come out and speak to us, where we try to do it hybrid. But I think it's important, right? Because this money is supposed to be helping our residents, and it needs to help the most people and the most people that are in need. And I think it was Councilor Politis, he said it last week, and I think he said it again tonight. Some of the people that really need to benefit from this, they're working 2 and 3 jobs. They can't come out to a meeting. And that's unfortunate because it's usually the squeakiest wheel gets the most oil, but that wheel probably don't need the oil, but because it's squeaky, we're going to look at that. So I think it's important that we try our utmost best as a council of 9 to have people come out and to give us their opinions. Now, maybe what we need to do at that meeting is show them these categories and see if they agree with these categories, and then be able to try to narrow these categories down a little bit more so that we can start using this money, right? So that it doesn't sit on the table for something else to capture it. So I think we just need to be a little bit more intentional. We need to be a little bit more thoughtful. We need to make sure that the money goes to the people that need it the most, and that we're doing, we're helping the most people with what we have. That's my suggestion. I'm also not saying that we need to have 7, 10, 15 meetings before we as a council make a decision. We as a council need to make a decision and make a decision on how to spend this money, but we need to do so very thoughtfully and very intentionally. So I'm not, and I know I'm not a part of this committee, but I'm not in favor for another committee. I'm in favor of the council getting the information and making intentional decisions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Boy, a lot of information, and I don't want to reiterate a lot of what has been said, but I wanted to take a little exception with the statistically valid information. I guess according to the textbook, it may be statistically valid, but when we look at 5% compared to almost 18% on the library survey, I don't think that we've reached the depth and the breadth of the community that we would need to really get a good gauge for what happens. And I'm not suggesting that we do it again. I'm also saying that, maybe when we define the categories that may be funded, my biggest concern has been and continues to be the silent minority, the voiceless. How do we make sure that those who don't have access to computers, those people who don't traditionally do surveys, how do we protect them? Because my fear is always those who speak the loudest will get the most money. And I think we have to be very cognizant and as a council, make sure that we are looking after all of our residents, not just those who are the loudest or those that come out with the greatest numbers for their particular group or category. But I do want to say, when comparing the survey responses, I don't think it's anyone's fault. When we talk about the library, there was a whole subcommittee devoted to outreach, 6 to 8 people doing that. When we did our survey, it's my understanding that was a consultant and Carrie. And so I'm not saying it was anyone's fault. I think it was more about the process. But I do think when I compare 400 to almost 700, 1,750, there's a big difference. And I think that the outreach was a lot different. But I do want to make sure that we are being very sensitive and thoughtful about protecting those residents who I call the voiceless, who don't really participate because of, for whatever reason, that we are thoughtful and careful about how we dole out the money. Thank you.
I didn't, I want to apologize to Stanley because we're presenting and I just saw your hand up. So I want to go to you, Stanley. Sorry for the delay. Carrie, maybe we can stop presenting the screen so that I'm able to accurately see hand raises. So Carrie, excuse me, Stanley, you have the floor.
Yes, and mine are belated only because the counselors that have spoken, particularly counselors Politis, Curtin, and DeBeetham Brown, are on the wave that I'm on. I think there's a way to respect those neighbors who have been dutiful and responding, and the consultant having broken it down into the categories that you have seen, but also ultimately recognizing and there is a countdown on when these funds can be used, not just deciding when the funds will be used, but using them. And depending on the types of programs that the council ultimately decides, that may require more time for certain programs than it does for others. But I don't know of anybody, group, I'll say, just to clarify, that knows the needs of the community better than those who have been elected this town council. And I do believe that we can take advantage of upcoming sessions and getting the public out to the degree that the town council needs to hear more. I think the council doesn't give itself enough credit. I know you know the needs of the community, whether that's based on the survey responses, or you're having been there knocking on doors and continuing to bring to my attention almost on a daily basis the needs of the community. If the needs are as great as I think has been represented, it's time to make these funds work for the community in the way that this town council determines.
So thank you for that, Stanley. And before I recognize Councilor Harrington, I just have a question. So if the council decides to be the entity that hears presentations from the members of the public, does the town staff have the capacity to receive different applications, and then the town council would have to hear presentations from members and organizations of the community who are seeking funds? Does the council have the time commitment to be able to do that? I know outside of this, at my 9 to 5, one of the responsibilities is to seek and look for a community, cities, work with cities and towns that are putting RFPs out for certain things related to opera. There's a whole application process and presentation process that some communities are engaging in to have a fair, equal representation of who gets what and when. And so I was under the thought that maybe the committee, community members who came and who talk and people who don't come and talk will be on the committee, and they'll work with the consultant to do more of the public engagement, lead the second half of the engagement program, organizations such as ABC, and I know there's an organization like the Laurel Park community, and some of them have also expressed interest on being on the American Rescue Act and participating to get engagement up relative to this, but also siphoning through applications and then making final recommendations to the council and deciding what should be funded and what should not be funded. But with that, I'll go to Councilor Harrington, and then Councilor Merritt, Councilor Curtin, and then Councilor DeBeetham Brown, in that order.
Thank you, Chair. In my opinion, even though it was a low percentage of response, the categories that have been identified are pretty much indicative of many of the needs that I see in our community. And so in my opinion, I don't dismiss what has already been submitted. I do recognize that many other residents did not participate, and therefore it would be great to have their opinion. But there's been conversations I've had with Councilor Curtin relative to, the whole, Wedgwood issue and just housing in general in our community that needs attention. How do we address that? There's businesses, some were able to do well actually during the pandemic and prosper, while others either failed or diminished in terms of their capacity to be successful. What do we do for those businesses? It would be great to bring more business to the community, but I think most importantly, it's important that we work with the businesses that we currently have. Same thing with the residents, to work with the residents that we do have. What can we do to assist them in some form or fashion? We don't have endless dollars. So it is important. And I think the council does know, for the most part, what the needs of the community are. So if that ends up being the way that we approach it, I'm 100% in favor of that. I yield. Thank you. You're silent.
You're on mute, sir.
Councilor Merritt.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to point out that we have a 104 million plus budget. And this is, we're talking about our $1.6 million. And that we're supposed to spend that 104 million every year on what the people want. And I think we have a pretty good idea of what that is. And we get communications regularly from the voters. So I like the attitude of the town manager, who says that we really do know what people want. We get calls all the time. So this is to say this questionnaire isn't adequate, of course it isn't. But it does give us a list of some specific interests, and I think we need to document it, because the $1.6 million isn't going to satisfy much of that list. But maybe we ought to keep these things for our next 104 million. So we'll be able to finance them some other way. And it would be a good guideline. But I think we're spending too much time on this, because it is only $1.6 million, and we have to deal every year with 100 million plus. So it's proportionally out of joint. But I think documenting what these ideas are and looking for other ways of financing them might be a good idea. And what we actually finance out of the $1.6 million probably won't be satisfy many people, but we have to do the best we can. And but I don't think we should spend forever trying to figure out what that should be. Thank you.
Councilor DeVito Brown, and then Councilor Curtin, and then we'll move on. And then at the next Finance Subcommittee meeting, hopefully we'll come up with after council members have the ability to dive deep, the Finance Subcommittee at its next meeting will make recommendations on categories. So Councilor DeVito Brown, was that a legacy hand?
No, no, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm hoping that we can start the work of doing the work. I'm hoping that we can start with whatever our next work session is, that we can start whittling down these categories. Because once again, as some have said, it's not an infinite amount of money. It's $1.6 million, and we can't fund everyone and everything. So I would hope that we can start working on this. I know that we don't have our second meeting in August, but maybe the second meeting in September, we can start to do the work sessions as the town manager had suggested, in trying to get people out and in trying to get a plan to see how we can spend this money intentionally. It's important that we as a council, because we're going to be the ones responsible for this. And I know that everyone has work to do and everyone has a lot to do, but to make a presentation to a committee who's not going to make a recommendation to the council, and the council might want to hear that presentation again, I think that is just a lot. And it's going to waste time, and it's going to slow down the process of us trying to get the money to where the money is going to do the most good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And sorry for the barking in the back. Winston is a little bit upset on tonight, but it's not my turn to watch him. So
Oh.
please forgive me.
We like Winston.
Council Curtin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Councilor Merritt said it perfectly. And this is what I've been trying to get across. We're responsible for $104 million budget, and we sit through that and make decisions. So this is not a difficult one, but what I would like to do is just to recommend to this committee that at this point in the process, I think tonight would be fitting to make a recommendation to the full council in regards to the next phase in this process. And I think there's consensus on this committee tonight in regards the approach we take, the information that we've received so far in regards to the survey. And like the town manager said, we know what the issues are. We just have to make those decisions. So I would say to make a recommendation to the full council in how we move to phase 2 of this process and get it going. Like I said, there's a lot of valuable information out there. And we could start engaging those community groups who have been engaged from the process and get the ball going and have those meetings with the council. The one thing that I want to also add tonight, and James, please don't take this the wrong way, but I think it's important for me to get a sense on, as time goes by, James, the consultant, has to get paid for this process. And I know the last meeting we talked roughly around 10,000. So someone needs to provide, a time frame. If we were to stretch this out to 2 months, what type of costs we're looking at? Because obviously those fundings are coming right out of this 1.6. So the longer we take to go through this process, it's costing more of the funds to go to administrative process and trying to get this out. So those will be my comments for now. But I think the recommendation, I would say, is to send to council to say, let's move to phase 2 of this process. So thank you.
Thank you for that recommendation.
You're on mute.
Oh, sorry, I'm on mute. Thank you for the recommendation. I will ask Carrie and Stanley to put together a plan based on the feedback you heard from the committee and members, the guest counselors that's on the committee, and hopefully make a final recommendation to the full, for our next finance committee meeting, to the full council. And if we need a special finance committee meeting, Carrie, please let me know, and Stanley, so that we could move forward in the process. I know we had a community engagement plan, and I don't know where we are as it relates to hosting public sessions. Is the consultant along with the town staff hosting those sessions, or is the recommendation for the council to now be the leader and host those sessions at our working sessions? Please put together a plan and bring it to the next finance subcommittee meeting. And if you feel that we need a special meeting, as I mentioned, please let me know, and we'll have a special meeting to vote on whatever we need to vote on to move to the next, to the full council.
We can do that, Chair McClary. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I'll go to Council Politis before, and then we'll move on to the discussion on unassigned fund balance. Council Politis.
Thank you. I'm not really sure we have to go all through that. I mean, I think the discussion that we've had through tonight, I think we could, and if everybody's willing, I would make a motion that we could put this forward to town council to put, let's say the top 6 categories on for discussion in the second meeting in September, to open it up to public discussion and work on that in September. and get this ball rolling as opposed to constantly pushing the ball down the road. I mean, it doesn't seem like it's rocket science to me, based on tonight's discussion, that we take the top 6 categories or even maybe the top 8 categories, and then, work on the second meeting in September and whittle those down into something that we can move forward with, along with some public discussion. So,
So Counselor, thank you for that. I hear that, but I know, I know James talked about putting together a criteria or metric to help us decide those top categories. And so I would like for James and the town manager and Carrie to put together the metric and based on the data that they receive, make a recommendation to us. We're meeting next month. And so next month is August. If we're saying put it on the second meeting of the second meeting in September, we won't be losing any time. We have another meeting a month prior to September. And so I think at the next finance meeting in August, we'll have the criteria so that there is no public outrage that how do you determine that the top 6 was appropriate? Maybe it's the top 4, maybe it's the top 2. I would like to see what James and the consultant has done in the and other communities on how they narrow it down. And if the top 6 happens to be appropriate, then I won't have any objections to the motion, but I would like for them to put some type of criteria together so that we know how we decided the top 6, the top 5, the top 4, the top 3, so that when we move to the full council, if the public says, well, I wanted small businesses, or I wanted schools to be, or I wanted the litter campaign to be included, but you didn't include that in there, we have to have a rationale as how we determine the categories that we determine.
Pardon me, Mr. Chair, but we have that already. We have, although I think an inadequate sample, we already have a sample that shows us what the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way to the end categories are. I mean, we already have that information based on this sample. Do we not?
We do. James,
Okay.
A quick question. Is it appropriate for us to just do the top 6 and move it forward? Or is there any other thing, any criteria or any other things that you've seen in the other communities?
Yeah, I think you'd want to flesh it out a bit. Generally we kind of look at it almost like a 2-pronged kind of approach. The first thing you want to look at is to make sure anything that, is proposed is, ARPA eligible, you're using it for an eligible purpose. But the second part then goes into that rubric and you look more at like best practices. So you'd probably want to do is develop a series of best practices for the town as to, what's the most strategic and best use of your monies. And then, that's kind of what you focus on, for those items. So I think you would kind of want to, kind of run each one of those through those, through those best practices as well.
Right. Wouldn't you do that through the working committees that we're talking about?
I suppose you could.
But I think what he's saying is we can scale it down here in this committee after we go through the rubric. And then once we scale it down and develop the best practices, then we bring it to the full council for discussions and a little bit more focused discussions. That's what I hear. But what you're saying is you want to go early and then have the town council to scale it down and focus it and then have discussions when it's not focused and scale down to make sure that it's in compliance with what ARPA says, what the IRS says that you can use it for. Am I correct, James?
You're correct. Typically when it goes to the council, in my experience, it's been fully vetted. It's either gone through, a series of administrative officials, a standalone task force, a subcommittee such as this. That's generally who's, in my experience, has done some of that work. And then when it, what goes to the council really is, kind of the more polished things, and they're going to still be making the decisions, but, things will be scored at that point. Everything should be, it would be an eligible use of the ARPA monies, and then they can make their decision, based on that information. Everything's clean and polished at that point.
And then, James, can you tell me again, when is the deadline for us to have the monies allocated? Is it 2024, 2023, 2024?
Correct. There's 2 dates you need to have in mind.
Yep.
One is the end of 24, and it's calendar year. So December 31st, 2024, funds need to be obligated. And that means essentially you have to have something formal in place, a resolution, a signed contract with somebody, something like that. And then the monies need to be fully spent by the end of 2026, again, calendar year. Any monies that are not spent at that point would need to be returned to the Treasury.
Yep. And so I think I hear from the council and members of this subcommittee, I hear that there are people out there hurting, and there are different projects that we need. But we heard from the public last week, and there was a number of people on the call about making sure that the public, that we do things in decency and order. And so I do understand that there is some excitement to move it forward to the overall full council. But I think we as a committee could flush it out some more. And as James said, flush it out and then come up with some rubrics and criteria to score these items, and then bring it to the full council. And then the full council could do the things that they want to do, whether it's adding things, not adding things, hosting public hearings. I think between now and next month's meeting, if Terry and the town staff could flush that out and make, send it to this committee, and please feel free to add the full council on the document. And then hopefully at the next finance committee meeting, those categories will be flushed out, and we can make recommendations to the full council for our working meeting in September. All right, with that, we're going to just move on.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair,
sir,
my hand is up.
I understand that, Councilor Curtin, but everyone had 2 rounds to speak. And so we have some more items on the agenda. And so I would ask that you either send Carrie or myself or finance and James email. We will move on to the discussion related to the unassigned fund balance. Thank you. Jane, the discussion on the unassigned fund balance, this item was requested by Councilor Merritt. He had some concerns related to where our unassigned fund balance was. And so I've asked Carrie to put this on the agenda to give us a briefing on where we are with our unassigned fund balance, where the monies have been spent, et cetera. And so she's sent the memo out to the community, to the members of this committee. And so I'll turn it over to Carrie, who will give us a presentation related to the unassigned fund balance.
All right, so as you guys received my memo late last week, I did some analysis on the unassigned fund balance per our fund balance policy. Our levels of adequate unassigned fund balance is between 15 to 20% of the subsequent year's budgeting operating revenues. The Government Finance Officers Association recommends an amount equal to 2 months of regular general fund expenditures or revenue. Over the past few years, our fund balance our unassigned fund balance has decreased. If you look at the screen in fiscal year 2020, our fund balance was $21.1 million. Because we used to assign $1.4 million to balance the annual operating budget. We moved that to $2.5 million in 2021. And then we increased it to $2.75 million in 2022. We had to do an additional assignment of $1.35 million. So we had the $1.4 million in the assigned, to balance the budget, but because we increased the assignment to $2.75 million, we had to up the assignment by $1.35 million. Fiscal year 2021, we had a good year. Revenues topped expenditures by $783,000. So we finished 2021 with $20.557 million in our unassigned fund balance. Unfortunately, fiscal year 2022 has been a tough year for us. It looks like we're going to finish the year needing 2.6 million of the 2.75 million that we assigned to balance the budget. So what that means is that we're going to have to do an additional assignment of the 2.75 million for the fiscal year 2023 budget. We've been fortunate in years past that we've assigned fund balance to balance the operating budget, but we've never actually had to use it because our operating revenues have surpassed our expenditures and our budget for the year. So even though we were anticipating a $1.4 million shortfall, we never actually had to use that assignment. So that assignment, the 1.4, kept rolling year after year after year. So we never had to touch our unassigned fund balance. Now, fiscal year 2022 is different. We're going to have to actually use 2.6 million of the $2.75 million that we assigned for the fiscal year 2022. So the difference is that we're going to have to basically make an additional assignment of the 2.75 million for the fiscal year 2023 budget. So that if we have a tough year in fiscal year 2023, we'll have an assigned fund balance to balance the budget as was adopted by the town council. So best estimate, fiscal year 2023, our beginning fund balance is going to be $17.94 million. That's still in our fund balance policy, about 17%. So nothing to worry heartily about, but it is something that is new for the town of Bloomfield, and that's kind of the status of our unassigned fund balance in a nutshell. I'll be happy to take questions.
Councilor Merritt and then Councilor Curtin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I asked for this and I am very concerned about the drop in our fund balance. And I'd like to go back, and if I sound like the prophet of doom, I intend to. It's wise to prepare for the worst and plan for the best. Plan for the worst and hope for the best. I want to go back to the 1980s when the council at that time, I wasn't on it during the 1980s, spent a lot of money, hired a lot of people, and the budget really climbed up. And the recession in 1990, early 90s came, and we had life in the council in the 1990s was miserable. We had to lay off a whole bunch of people. The town manager got fired. It was a very hard time. And we went into a recession totally unprepared, and it was bad. When we went into the recession in 2008, we were much better prepared. We didn't hire a bunch of people. As a matter of fact, I can remember advising the town manager to not hire a bunch of people. He was intending to hire, these were policemen. But I said, let's not hire them. Let's hold off on that. Because if you hire them, you're going to have to lay them off. And because that's what happens when you have a recession. And that's what happened in the 1990s. And I see us in a period similar to, we're approaching a slowdown, probably a recession. Question of how you define it, but we're in for a tough couple of years now. And I think we would be very wise to prepare for it. And we're not in good shape for it because our fund balance has dropped rather drastically. It used to be over 20% of our budget. Now it's down to 17, and we're saying, oh, that's fine. That's what's recommended. I'm concerned about the drop, and the deputy mayor picked up on something that I think would be a good idea, and that is to do a freeze on hiring. Now, you can call it a soft freeze and have the town manager, there needs to be, sometimes that causes all sorts of bad things, but we're in trouble. And if we don't recognize it, next year is going to be very difficult. You're not going to be able to have an increase in taxes. It's going to be a recession year. It's also an election year. So there's no chance of having an increase in taxes. And yet we have a budget that went up $7.5 million this year of spending budget, but we didn't raise taxes. So but next year we're going to have to pay for it. And I don't know how we're going to do it. So I'm a little concerned of our situation now and think we ought to really get serious about it. And I hate to be an alarmist, but I am. And I think I'm wise to be, and I don't regret it. So I would recommend that we do as the deputy mayor suggested and hold off on some hiring. And whether you call it a firm freeze or what, we got a problem. I mean, I don't want to go through the 1990s again, where the town manager got fired and so did most of the council. But, you know, that's not fun. And it's not good for the town. And I think we need to be fiscally responsible and try to get ready for this recession and plan for it. And if it doesn't happen, great. But I think we need to plan for the worst. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilor Mary. Carrie or Stanley, would you like to respond to that? Relative to the hiring freeze, would you like to go back and maybe at the next finance subcommittee meeting, present some potential options of what positions, if the committee has a taste for that you can put on hold for a couple of months?
I'd like for finance director to go into greater explanation. She already put it in the communication of why this has been an exceptional year. But yes, ultimately, if the council from reviewing fund balance with the explanation that Carrie is about to give, what has happened over the last year with tax assessments and settlements, and you put a hold on the budget, that's a pretty powerful message. And saying that the progressive agenda that the town council approved just a couple of months ago, it's pretty powerful and disappointing.
Sure, I will, and I should have probably briefed this in my summary, but 2022 has been a year that was faced with a challenge that I don't foresee happening in future years. We settled a record amount of tax appeal cases. I think we might only have 3 open cases remaining. So in a normal year, our tax revenue surpasses the anticipated budget by, $2 million. And this year we had a shortfall of $1.7 million in our tax collection overall. And that was because of these one-time settlements. When we go to court, obviously there was a large amount of cases that were open. We were able to settle them and finalize the assessments so that they get on to the to the grand list, and we're able to tax them without any future tax appeals, which is good. So that is a one-time shortfall that I believe we won't be experiencing in 2023.
Councilor DeBeetham Brown and then Councilor Curtin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have to ask a question and then I'll make a comment. through you to our finance director. So Carrie, what do you, or how are you feeling now about projections for next year? Because our fund balance is low compared to where it used to be. So how are you feeling about our projections for next year?
I mean, I think the ultimate goal is we increase the fund balancing the budget on from 1.4 million to 2.5 million in response to COVID. Back, when COVID hit, we felt the community, we didn't want to increase taxes, so we increased the assignment of fund balance. I think ultimately a great goal for us and the town council would to be start reducing the assignment back down to the 1.4 because that bridges the gap between revenue and expenditures and makes it a little more comfortable, I would say. I do think that 2024 is going to be a tough year, but hopefully we'll get some growth to the grand list that will offset an increase in expenditures, and that's all we can really plan for.
Thank you. So my question in it's been a little bit more lately than in the past where Joe and I seem to agree. I am concerned about what's coming down the pike. I am concerned because everything that I've heard is saying that we're heading for a recession. And it would be foolhardy of us to hear that a storm is coming and not prepare for it. Plan for the worst, expect the best, I think is what Joe said, or something to that effect. But if we don't start looking at it now, we might be in a worse position. Now, we did just pass a budget. The town manager is correct. But I think since then we have hit some hiccups and some roadblocks. I think I was telling someone the story yesterday. I used to be able to fill up my car for $45, $50. Now you put $45, $50 in your car and your car is asking you, where you think you're going? And we're still having supply chain issues. So I do believe that the council might have to make some decisions, some hard decisions. I don't know. I mean, Councilor Merritt has been singing that song. He's been very consistent with it through budget, and he's now saying it again. And I think it's something that we need to look to. Here we are. We tried to keep taxes flat this year because we understood the remnants of COVID. Now, if we're going into a recession, the people that we're trying to help this year is definitely going to need help next year. But the way things are looking, the town might need help itself. So I would suggest that we start having those conversations quickly. And if the council needs to pivot so that the town can pivot, we need to be intentional on doing that. Just in case, right? We're doing just in case scenarios. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Curtin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just started by saying that I do support the comments from my colleague, Councilor Merritt. I think he's spot on. I think both him and I made these comments during the budget process. I thought that, with knowing exactly the uncertainty in front of us and making some of those decisions, I think that you look back now and back then, I don't think it was the right decision to add additional, that many additional support staff. So definitely something to look into. And, that's the decision that we have to make as a council. We're responsible for making those decisions. So I do agree with that. And it's none of what Kerry said is a surprise. I mean, these are things that were discussed through the budget. Some of the question was posed. Obviously, we didn't have all the information at the time. I did talk about, coming up with, I know governments are not really in tune and having projections. We think about the budget, the 2023 budget, but I think we have to look beyond that and start planning accordingly, because as said by many on this meeting tonight that we don't have that latitude. And the reality is it goes back into, the comments we were having before. I think we're too hesitant sometimes, and I think we have to make decisions that are best for our town, and we need to act accordingly and not hesitate and take things for granted, because at the end of the day, we're not going to be able to, based on what I'm seeing, because I haven't seen a plan in place to increase revenue. And, most governments, when you talk about increase in revenue, it's talking about raising taxes, and we cannot afford to raise taxes in the town of Bloomfield. So I would say that we need to make some hard decisions now based on what we know. It's related discussions, but we have to start tightening up our belts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor, for your comments, and thanks all the councilors for their comments. Carrie, I have a question. Is it possible for the town manager and yourself to go back to figure out some options if we do a freeze of some positions, what cost savings over the next year that can help us with the hopes so that we can try to hopefully at the end of the year put some money back into our fund balance so that we can deal with what is coming. I'm of the opinion that the only way that you deal with the 9% of inflation is for a recession to happen. There's no other way to deal with inflation. The only way I think to deal with it is for government to cause a recession. And I think the Feds with the interest rates hikes, I think is going to soon be moving towards that, because they know that's the only way to get inflation down. And so, as my colleague said, we should start planning for a recession. And so if we can kind of get, I heard some ideas relative to some freezing of the positions that were approved during the budget session. If we can kind of get some projections of how much cost savings that will be, not saying that we're going to do it, just so that the committee could see how much dollars that will save moving forward, or any other potential cost savings that you can find in the budget for our next finance subcommittee. Deputy Mayor Davis, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make a couple of comments, and I'm no economist, and I don't know any of us on this call, or at least on this committee, are qualified to make these projections and these determinations as to what's going to happen. I agree that it's smart to plan and come up with some scenarios, but I'm a little troubled by some of the Monday morning quarterbacking. Folks, we voted a budget, people voted in favor of it, and now to kind of try and throw shade at, staff, I think is unfair. What we have to do is be cognizant and respectful of the process, what we all voted on, what we did, and try and find a way to work through it and be prepared for the next fiscal year. But I'm not one to throw shade on the folks that are, doing their jobs and trying hard to represent the best interests of Bloomfield. When we gave the slight tax decrease this year, we knew that we were going to have to either raise taxes next year. So I think it's a little disingenuous to say that, we tried to keep taxes flat. We knew what we were coming into for this coming year. So I think we as a collective body need to work and work together, and it's not one group, making mistakes. We all made a decision, and I think it's important to prepare and do some forecasting, but not to make any rash decisions right now. Let's do some forecasting and let's see how things look. But I am very supportive of the staff and the recommendations, what we all voted on as a town for our budget. And so we just have to pivot, take some time to see what the numbers and the forecast look like, and be prepared to act if we need to. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I think that was the request for Carrie to look at some of the projections. I don't think anybody wanted to vote or, not support the town staff. I asked to see some projections of potential cost savings and, to present to the finance subcommittee I don't think we're not supportive of the town staff. I think a part of that planning is to figure out and look at the forecast, as you mentioned. And I think one of the places that folks identified was and I think you may have mentioned it earlier, too, during the library discussion, is the additional staffing, the additional hires. And so
Right.
if Carrie and her team can kind of look at the overall big picture and put some projections together, as if like she did with the scenarios, if we do this is what we would save. If we do this, that, and any other, just to kind of give the committee something to look at. And if we decide to make the decision to, halt
Right.
hiring or whatever, that decision that is on us. But to get the information and collect it and see where we will be based
Right.
on the forecast and what some of the other members of this committee said, I
Right.
think is in line.
And I totally agree. I'm sorry. I agree with your tone and tenor, but I'm just hearing some other things that sound more not as level-headed as the way you just presented it. I just want to make sure that we are being fair and consistent here. So
Great.
thank you. I'm done.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councilor DeBeetham Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to say exactly what you said. I don't think anyone was trying to throw shade. I think what was being said was we need to be mindful of a storm that may be coming. So we need to plan for it. I don't believe anyone was throwing shade, and you said it clearly, Mr. Chair, for those who might have been confused as to what was said. But you also pointed out that when we were looking for money, the deputy mayor did say that we could probably put a hold on the positions that we voted on. So I think everyone is just trying to find solutions to a possible problem. No one is blaming staff. The council in its entirety voted on a budget. But I do believe that there were council members that was sounding the alarm at the time. So please, as Mr. Chair clearly said, no one's throwing shade. The committee is just trying to get some information so that we can make the best decision possible if and when needed. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Problem. Councilor Merritt.
Thank you. I would like to point out that things have changed a lot since we voted on that budget. And it's become increasingly clear that our economy is headed south much faster than a lot of us thought at that time. So I don't think there's any shame in the fact that we came up with that budget, even though I voted against it. I do have some background as an economist, and I don't claim to be called one, but that would be a dangerous statement. But I do think we're headed for a problem, and I think it would be better to be cautious, and I would encourage us to be that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more comments or discussions related to the unassigned fund balance? If not, we'll turn it back to Carrie for a discussion regarding our June 2022 financials. Carrie?
Right. So the tax collection rate through June 30th was 98.71. It's a little bit lower than it was last year at 98.73, but still higher than our budgeted 98.7%. Like I already touched on in my fund balance memo, last year, the town collected 2.4 million over the budgeted current year tax revenue. While this fiscal year, we only collected about 89,000 over budget. We finished the year $1.4 million under anticipated tax revenue, which I believe is a one-time shortfall, and I don't anticipate next year, if we do have a shortfall, it wouldn't be of this magnitude. On high notes, the real estate conveyance and building permit revenue, both really strong for this fiscal year 2022. We have 747,000 in real estate conveyance and 1.16 million collected in building permit revenue. Ambulance revenue also, we had a good year. It surpassed budget by 68,000. For expenditures, we are running tight. So as of the end of June, we are 99.2% of the budget. That does include 814,000 in encumbrance. the board has spent 99.8%. They only have about 82,000 left in their budget. I do anticipate the need to use about $2.6 million of the $2.75 million that was assigned for the fiscal year 2022 budget. These numbers are still fluctuating. We are still doing old year accounts payable batches. The last batch to process any invoice or services incurred before June 30th is mid-August. So I do anticipate the expenditures changing a little bit, but not drastically at this point. So it's kind of my financial report in a nutshell. I'll take any questions.
Any questions from member of the committee? Seeing no hands. Again, any questions? Nope. Okay, we'll move to public comment. Nancy, it looks like we have 4 members of the general public on. You can raise your hand, raise your virtual hand to be recognized. It's located on the bottom of your screen, and it has the indicator that says raise hand. Is there any public comment?
No hands raised, Chair.
Okay, I'll ask 2 more times. Does any member of the public like to speak? Provide feedback? Don't see any hands. Does any last call for any members of the general public who would like to speak? Not seeing any. We'll move on to approval of minutes. Is there a motion to approve minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passed. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved. Second.
Yes, thank you to the town staff for all your work. We appreciate it. And we are adjourned. Thank you,
night,
everyone.
everybody.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Love you.